Sorry about this. This is Mollie O'Donnell. I got stuck behind a car wreck on the way home, so I just made it into my office and setting up. So I'm going to transfer to my computer.
I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Here, I'll do this. That's fine. It's going to be great. Hi. Are you ready to get started? I think we should get started. Okay, awesome. All right, I'm just going to take this handy dandy microphone over back to the table. I just wanted to do a little razzle dazzle and get your attention. Yeah. So we're here, and this is the point where, we've been doing all of this education and learning and brainstorming, and so we're at this intersection, this crossroad where we're about to segue into some work with Glenna Norvell, my amazing partner in amazingness. And so what I first wanted to do was to give Glenna an opportunity to meet each of the task force members. She's already read your bio, so she knows all of the background and the depth of commitment that you bring to this experience. But it would be great if you could just high level let Glenna know your name, your affiliation, and how long you've lived in Inglewood. And I'd love it if we could start with Diane. And I'm just modeling what would be great if you could use your microphones as you do your introductions to Glenna.
Good evening. My name is Diane Reinhardt. I work at Craig Hospital. I do not live in Inglewood, but I've worked here for 34 years, so I've been at the hospital for 34 years. That's it.
I love it. And one of my favorite things about Diane, Glenna, you should know, is that I had the privilege of working or serving on a board with Diane for the Denver Metro Leadership Foundation. So I know that she is an impassioned community leader, community connector. So it's great to have been working with you. Yeah. Lindsay. Glenna knows Lindsay. All right, Sherry.
Good job. I've been working in Inglewood for about 7 years.
I'm Sherry Stinson. I have lived in Inglewood since 2012, so I guess 12 years now. And I am a realtor. I work in affordable housing. I'm on the Inglewood Housing Authority Board. Yeah.
And what I'd like to share about Sherry is do not underestimate the passion that Sherry brings to this vertical. I highly recommend Sherry. Everyone follow Sherry on Instagram. She is very, very highly acclaimed in the real estate industry. So great to have you on this. Yes.
Hi, my name is Joe Phillips. I own Fellow Traveler in downtown Inglewood. I don't live in Inglewood. I've tried.
I love it. And my favorite thing about Joe is he makes me very, very eager to go try this restaurant. So we have to go there for lunch. Yeah, but also, you know, you've asked really thoughtful, inquisitive questions, all through an equity lens, which I really appreciate. And part of me can't help but to wonder from your upbringing in Montbello. But yeah, so thank you for your contribution to this task force.
Do you want to try a taco?
Yeah, yeah, yes.
1, 2.
Jake.
Hi, I'm Jake Gilbert, and by affiliation, I guess you mean role on the task force. Is that right? Because
Sure,
Yeah,
role in
so
the task force, yeah.
I'm filling one of the homeowner roles, and I've lived in Inglewood since 1996.
And Jake, I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed about you on this task force is you have been really thoughtful about the questions around zoning, right? Which I really love that you continue to ask those questions. And so thank you for those thoughtful questions.
Good evening. I'm Brad Power. I'm the Director of the Community Development Department with the City of Englewood. I've been in my position about 8.5 years.
And Brad knows he's amazing. And you know Glenna, so do I need to wax poetic, Brad?
Only if you want to.
I mean, yes, he's been a great advocate on this task force, but also just so well-versed in all things around affordable housing. So thank you, Brad.
And I'll just add that Brad and his team are the ones who will tell us if the recommendations that you all have are feasible for our city and how we would actually implement them. So his role is incredibly critical to making sure that the work of this task force is effective and efficient. We've met Chelsea Munenkamp. I'm one of the 2 city council liaisons to this committee. I have been an Inglewood resident for 6 years, a renter and an owner, a first-time homeowner in the city. So I've seen what that first-time home ownership market is like. And I've been serving on the city council for about 2.5 years, my first term.
And Councilwoman, I think we have you to thank for this opportunity for everyone to come together. So thank you for that. Steve.
My name's Steve Yates. My affiliation with, I'm sorry, what is it that you mean by affiliation?
To the task force, yeah.
So what we're asking is what role do you serve on the task force? Represent a homeowner or a business owner?
Well, I'm a business owner. I've lived in Inglewood for almost 39 years. And I've got employees and, you know, so I kind of cover a bunch of different things.
Former
Yeah.
city council member.
Yes, and an ex-council member. So
I think Steve brings a lot of history, right, in terms of the history of how much the city has changed and kind of bringing that balance of consideration of
oh yeah, the
what not
city's
to
changed
forget.
quite a bit. It's changed, but it hasn't changed, you know. So, I mean, the city itself has always been a place where a lot of folks live until they pass, and the young people come in and they fill those spots, and it's just a cycle that goes on over. It's been primarily in my lifetime, Inglewood has been primarily people that are either entrepreneurs or they're the working class folks. There's, you know, over the past 5 years, there's probably been a big influx on people who are dealing with flying a desk all day long. Not saying that's a bad thing, but, you know, the types of careers have kind of changed, but that's changing all around, so.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. All right, Corey.
I'm Corey Whitaker. I'm with Habitat for Humanity Metro Denver. And so I do not live in Inglewood, but I am representing affordable housing, affordable homeownership specifically. And Habitat has a good amount of history in Inglewood. We built a lot over on the Hill. And so trying to advocate for ways in which we can encourage more affordable homeownership opportunities.
And what's great about Corey Glenna is he brings that experience of delivering the product. And so he has been one of our presenters in a past meeting. Yeah.
I'm stepping in because even though you have microphones, I'm having a little trouble hearing, so I'm stepping in so I can hear you. And I just feel more natural.
Well, nice to meet you. I'm Sophie. I've lived in Inglewood for about coming up on 4 years this fall. And I am representing renters on the task force.
And one of my favorite things about Sophie is she honors her voice on this task force and she listens very intently. And so I love the balance that she brings when in the breakout sessions. Glenna is she's been a very willing note taker, but also making sure that she's capturing the balanced information from the conversations. So thank you, Sophie.
Thank you.
Hi, Glenna. I'm Sean Lewis, City Manager, and not a voting member, just here to help in any way. I will have been here for 5 years next month. And so the amount of time I've lived here corresponds with the time I've been in the job. So yeah, love Inglewood.
And I think Glenna and I share in our appreciation for Sean and just keeping us really clear on direction of how we can get the most out of each meeting and making sure that there's real clarity in terms of where we're going and where we're going to end up. So Sean, thank you for keeping us on course.
I'm Samantha Hurst, and I'm a homeowner in Inglewood, fairly recent, maybe a year and a half. I rented in Denver before. Yeah, that's it.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Samantha asked some of the best questions. That is all. Thank you, Samantha.
Hi, I'm Aaron Martinez. I'm a homeowner in Inglewood here. I've been here for about 6.5 years. I also work for Urban Land Conservancy, which is a nonprofit in Denver that focuses on preserving affordable real estate for housing, both rental and home ownership, as well as affordable office space for nonprofits and other community assets to afford to stay in the communities that they serve.
Thank you.
And lastly, Aaron brings a depth of empathy to the conversations from lived experience and also from his career expertise. And so also, every single task force member is outstanding. So I leave it to you to do your introduction, Glenna.
Thank you. Hi, I'm going to sit. I have the trifecta of knee injuries, and I had it about 3 months ago. So I'm fine, but sometimes it just works to sit, and I think I'm not actually writing anything, so I'm Glenna, and I'm delighted to be here. I want to acknowledge that it's going to be really, really hard to fill the shoes of Tasha, right? Oh gosh, I didn't mean to turn my back. That's like a facilitator's worst.
I'm just a consultant, so you can
I'm a consultant. I'm not going to ignore you. So I think how I would like to introduce myself is to say that I lived in, I'm not entirely sure what the term was back then, but it was subsidized housing. My mom was a single mom, and we moved every year because she was looking for work. And so we lived in subsidized housing. She was a single mom, and it was hard for her to actually not only provide for me, but also have safe, secure housing for us. So I'm deeply grateful that we had that as I was growing up. The other thing is my mother never owned a home until she was in her 70s. How great is that? And she got there because she had an opportunity. It was a small town. Sorry, I got to catch my breath. A small town, and she could rent to own. That was the only way that she was able to, and it was nothing. It was a little cottage, but it was something to her. It meant the world to her. So I'm really, really grateful for the work that you do. I love facilitating groups to common purpose, and this is a big, big, meaty issue. So we've been in this education phase, right? And then at some point we're going to move into trying to do sense making, first of all, and then build consensus. And you have such a wonderful diversity of perspective here and experience here. And that is both an asset and sometimes it's difficult to sort of come together. So I'm looking forward to doing that work with you. And I'm really grateful for my partner, Tasha, for her work to getting us to this point. So what else do I want to say?
Can I add one thing, Glenna?
Please.
Just for the group, the staff and the facilitators have been meeting to just, find speakers, to just talk about topics. And I just want everybody to know that Glenna has been an integral part of that from the beginning. So even though she's kind of now here in person, facilitating, she has been behind the scenes helping to plan the meetings, review the notes, really dig into the material that you all have been putting out. So just
Thank
don't
you.
want you to think she's coming in green because she's been here the whole time in spirit.
I was walking outside and they were like, we need someone to come in. No, I'm just joking. Yeah. Anyway, it's nice to be here. Thank you. Tasha, are you running? Oh, look at this. This is so fancy. So Tasha's actually, given that she was here in the last meeting, she's actually going to walk us through this reflection activity, which I think is a norm. Well, I know it's a norm for you all because I've been helping with the agendas. And then from there, we'll do our learning, our discovery, our deepening understanding. And we have the Irish twins. Yeah, the Irish twins, Mollie and Mollie. So we're delighted to have you, Mollie. It'll be very easy. I know which one you are, so I feel like I'm a winner. And then we'll have another breakout discussion. And this time we're going to break it up. We're going to try something different with the breakout discussion and just kind of see where we get on that to see if we can mix it up just a little bit. And then we'll have an opportunity for Tasha to share some reflections. She's been with you for 6 months now. This will be your 6th meeting, correct, I think? 7th meeting. And then we'll ask that you do the closing activity of I like it, wish, I wonder. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to pass this to Sherry, but as I get ready to have us do the May reflection, we'll just do it like a group share out, okay? And I'm just curious, there's the question, was there anything new that you learned from the pre-read, or do you want to reflect on the amazing presentation overview that we received from Brian?
I really enjoyed Brian's presentation, but in the pre-reading as well, I really liked seeing the kind of table of all the different inclusionary housing policies of local governments that are in place, how long they've been there, like all of those details kind of lined up. I thought that was really informative to, kind of what we're working on and the neighborhood that we might want to land in. I thought that was great.
I would just really like to know numbers on the density that this cottage house plan will add. That's a question that I asked and he didn't have numbers. And so a little bit, it feels like we're adding density for density's sake if we don't really know what the target is or how many it's providing, and I'm sure the proponents to these changes know exactly how many units it's going to add per block, because I've seen that online and I've seen the numbers and I thought they looked kind of ridiculous. Like I couldn't imagine that it was actually adding that much density to each block. And so that's kind of why I took the opportunity to ask, and he didn't have that, so I'd love to know.
So there are several land use laws that the state passed by mid part of May when they adjourned. And there's two that really have some pretty significant potential land use implications that we'll have to adjust to. The parking bill relates to lowering parking standards in all types of development that are near transit locations, both bus and rail. So the state has to propagate all of the rulemaking around what those laws actually mean and how the local communities will be called upon to implement them. So we don't know the specifics yet in terms of what that drills down to and the impact in the geographic areas that we'll have to adjust, but that's one of them. And then there's another one that is related to additional housing rules around transit-oriented developments. Again, rail lines within a half mile of a rail station and within a quarter mile of high-frequency 15 minutes or less bus service. So again, the state is spending the summer and probably the early part of the fall figuring out a map, literally a map of each community and where those areas would have to adjust their zoning requirements to permit a minimum of 40 dwelling units per acre within those areas on average. So there's all types of ways that you can exempt industrial land and parkland and railroads and that type of thing. But the general idea is to try to get a lot more housing density throughout the metro area around the high frequency transit locations. So again, both of those go into effect next year in 2025. That's correct. We'll have to adjust our Title 16, which is our Unified Development Code, to reflect that state requirements.
Wait, I was going to share one more thing too. Since it was included, there was an article from CPR that kind of went over what was passed this year in the legislature around housing. But I guess I will share one thing from the affordable homeownership lens. There really wasn't much in that helped create new affordable homeownership. And so we were a little disappointed in that this year and are going to be pushing really hard next year. And I think when I read things like that, they use the term affordable housing. They don't use affordable rental housing. They just kind of say affordable housing. And I don't know how many people that are reading that know the distinction between, $80 million for tax credits. Well, that's $80 million for affordable rental, not for affordable rental and affordable homeownership. And so I think communities need to recognize that and recognize, that they need to be pushing their representatives to advocate for homeownership as well, because it's challenging and it doesn't get the attention or the funding or the bills that maybe it deserves.
Thank you. Any final reflections? Okay. I think it's important to keep us grounded always in each of the meetings in your strategic vision, right? So I'm old school. I'm not actually, normally I just do chart paper. So every time I'm going to be bringing chart paper that has your strategic vision, because with a slide deck, right, you have to advance. I think it's important to have it visible all of the time. So I know Tasha did work with you in in co-creating this, and this is really your North Star. So there will be times when we get tripped up, when we have different perspectives. And I think it's important that we remember that you actually, this is where you came together and created a shared vision, or a strategic vision. So it's not a vision for the city of Inglewood, but specifically on this. So we're going to leave that up there. I would love for someone to just read it. I think there's power in actually articulating it out loud. So would someone volunteer to do that, please? I won't make you stand up. Please, Joe.
To ensure equitable access to affordable and diverse housing options. To ensure equitable access to affordable and diverse housing options for all residents of Inglewood, including seniors, low-income individuals, home buyers, renters, and future generations, with a focus on those struggling to afford housing costs. Our goal is to create a sustainable housing ecosystem that fosters stability, encourages community investment, and contributes to the overall well-being of our diverse community.
Very great, thank you, Joe. All right, I am not used to microphones, so before I was talking really low because I was afraid that it would be too loud, so you'll allow me an adjustment period as I get used to this. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mollie, our first of Mollies, to walk us through our presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. And good to see all of you again. I have been here once before, so excited to be back. Can I control the clicker? Great. Perfect. So I'm the Mollie Fitzpatrick, co-founder and managing director at Root Policy Research. We worked with the city of Inglewood while you were going through some of the code rewrite, not on the code itself, but on the housing needs assessment, as well as on some incentive and inclusionary feasibility analysis. That analysis was in your packet this time around prior. So I'll be talking through the results of that a little bit, but actually first, I'm going to go ahead and do kind of an overview of just inclusionary and linkage fees in general. Then we're going to jump to Mollie O'Donnell, who is the Division Director of Housing and Community Development in Longmont. They have had inclusionary zoning on the books for quite a while, and so she's got great perspective on how their program works, what's worked well about it, and that sort of thing. We helped them make some tweaks recently to their program as well. So I'm also familiar with their program, and Mollie is certainly the expert and can give you really the city perspective on kind of why they went that route, what it's doing, what it's working, all of that sort of thing as well. So I'm going to do a brief overview, then I'm going to kick to Mollie, then we're going to come back to me and I'll do a little bit more of a deep dive on the analysis we did specifically for Inglewood related to inclusionary housing and incentive options, as well as talking in a little bit more depth about linkage fees. So that's kind of the rough overview. Oh, hi, Mollie. Now I can see you on the screen. That's fun. So good to see you. Just to kind of chat through these tools in general, I think the highest level thing to think about is that all the tools that we're talking about tonight and in this kind of category, they're all market-based tools. They are designed specifically to leverage the private market as it develops new housing to deliver outcomes that the city might want, that the community might need. So these are programs that only work in conjunction with new development. And so because of that, we want to be really sensitive to the market, but also capitalize on the market as well, because it's a good way to leverage those resources to make sure that you are getting as a city the things that you want and need out of that new development. So there's three kind of big categories of market-based tools, or three types of market-based tools that we generally think of as policy levers that a city has. The first one of those is linkage fees. Linkage fee is the same as an impact fee. So if you're familiar with the impact fee structure, there's a lot of Colorado communities that have that. What a linkage fee says is there's a connection between this benefit that we need and this new development that's creating that need. And so you think about it from a perspective of parks. So if you are a community that has 100 houses and one park, if you're going to build 100 more houses, you're going to need one more park to kind of maintain that house to park ratio. And so the way an impact fee works is it quantifies that ratio and says, okay, for all of the new homes that get built, For every home, what they have to pay for 1/100th of that park. And so there's a fee assessed with that to help the city maintain the benefits that it's already providing or the benefits that are needed because of that development. So there's a link between those two. That's called quantifying that link is called a nexus study. Affordable housing linkage fees work the same way. They're saying, look, when new development happens, that is creating a need for housing at specific price points. The market is not providing that housing at all those price points. And so we establish a link between that, and then it assesses a fee to cover the cost of those lower income housings that are being, the need that's generated from that. So it sounds convoluted. The bottom line is it's a fee on new development that helps pay for affordable housing that is in proportion to the need created by that new development. Linkage fees can apply to commercial development. They can apply to residential development. They can kind of apply across the board. That is distinct from incentives and inclusionary housing, which typically just apply to residential development. Okay, so kind of the second category there in the yellow are voluntary development incentives. Sometimes people call this voluntary inclusionary housing, but really it's an incentive program where you say, hey, you're building something, we'll give you more favorable development conditions if you give us something in the form of some affordable housing. So a certain percentage of your units, we want them priced like this, and if you do that, we give you lower parking requirements or a density bonus or a fast-track housing review. So we're making the development process better for you. That's good for the developer. And in exchange, the developer says, okay, I will give you some units. Obviously, the distinguishing characteristic there is the developer has to opt in. So you're not making them do anything, you're offering an incentive. And then finally, inclusionary zoning or inclusionary housing. These are mandatory requirements that are similar to that incentive program that we just talked about, except you don't have to give them anything. So inclusionary requirements basically say, look, if you're building new housing, we would like you to dedicate a certain percentage of those homes to be at a price point that we need as a community. It's sort of the price for the privilege of developing in our community. And so oftentimes, inclusionary programs also do package in incentives. So a lot of times they look just like those voluntary incentive programs, except they are mandatory. So a lot of times you'll see, look, we do have an inclusionary housing program. You do have to build these units or pay us a fee instead of building. But if you build them for us, then you get a bunch of development incentives. So in Colorado, inclusionary zoning, inclusionary housing historically has only been applied to home ownership. Now, because of enabling legislation a few years ago, you can do it on rental housing or home ownership housing. The state does say you have to give people options. You can't just say you have to build exactly this. And so the way most communities do that is they say, look, you can build these units. We have an inclusionary housing. You owe us 10% of your development at 60% AMI or whatever it might be. You can either build those units as part of your development or you can pay us a fee, and then we as the city will use that for affordable housing. That's the overview of what those policies are. Again, they're all market-driven programs, so they're all trying to leverage the private market. That means they, if you're not building any new housing or if no new housing comes online, then they're not going to create any new affordable units. It's also important to note that particularly with inclusionary housing, it's not a policy that is designed to increase your housing supply. It's a policy that's designed to target the housing that's coming online to the price points you need. We'll talk a little bit about impact on developers and on kind of the market in general. But broadly speaking, I talked about some of those trade-offs. A lot of times we give incentives and then also ask something in exchange. If it's a voluntary program, the incentive has to be a lot better than the requirement, right? Because you have to get people to opt in. In a mandatory situation, you want to take a look at that. That's why we do feasibility analyses. You want to know how much this is going to impact the developer, but it doesn't have to be net neutral. So how is the development itself impacted? This is kind of how does the pro forma or the bottom line of the development get impacted by these types of policies? So if we're mandating affordable unit construction, so think inclusionary housing, in a rental development, that means it costs the same amount to build all the units as it would if they weren't income restricted, but you're limiting their revenue that comes in. So you're changing kind of the revenue side of that equation for developers. In for sale, it's similar. You're limiting the revenue that they can gain by selling that property because you're saying for 5 or 10% of these, we're going to say you have to sell it at this price point. A linkage fee, on the other hand, or if you're paying a fee in lieu on an inclusionary policy, it hits the other side of the pro forma. So in that case, your revenue stays the same. It stays market rate, but you're paying a fee on the front end, so it increases your development costs. So these two policies kind of they hit different sides of the pro forma, but broadly speaking, they have a similar type of impact, and that they thin out the margins of any development project. Incentives, on the other hand, when you layer incentives on, that can negate some of that, how you've changed their pro forma, because you may add incentives that can either reduce their cost or can increase their revenue, depending on which incentive is doing what. We're not going to get quite in the weeds on that, but I'm happy to answer questions on kind of how that works. But broadly speaking, when you're looking at these policies and we do feasibility analysis, we're just playing with what a typical development looks like and saying, what if we make you do this many units? What if we give you this benefit? And you just look at how that balances and how much that may or may not impact a development. When we look at the market as a whole, there's been a lot of research on this. The first, key question is, do these actually produce affordable housing units? Like, are they worth it? Broadly speaking, yes, they certainly can produce units. There are some ifs associated with that. Number one is if the ordinance is actually structured to do that. Sometimes ordinances are structured more to bring in revenue that will then get rolled into additional unit production. Sometimes they will also only produce units, as I said, if you're building new units, if there's private market activity. Other key question is, does inclusionary and linkage policies, do they increase housing costs? That is a really tricky question. Generally speaking, you hear kind of the side of developers that say, well, if you raise my cost 5%, I raise rent 5%. The reality is that their formula is way more complicated than that, and that's not by and large true. Generally, developers are saying, the market will bear this rent, that's what I'm going to charge. How can I build my pro forma to still give me a margin at that rent that I know I need to hit in order to cover my debt and all of those other things? So they're usually working backwards from the rent. And so you kind of hear that. On the other side, you hear policymakers say, well, whatever, we add costs all the time and you guys keep building, so it doesn't matter. And the truth is somewhere between, right? So most of the academic research shows that it has between a 0 and 3% increase on market rents that are supporting that. So in some communities, there's no impact on the rent whatsoever when you add these requirements. In some communities, they've seen up to a 3% increase. And that typically corresponds with about an extra, like a 1-year bump in rent gains. So it can increase housing costs. It does not always. Does it slow housing production? So there's been lots of talk, I think, particularly in the Denver metro, about how Denver implemented inclusionary and then their permits went way down. The truth of that is that Denver hasn't actually implemented it yet. So the drop in permits in the city of Denver is completely related to interest rates. So multifamily is having a harder time penciling right now because of interest rates. That said, so I want to debunk that myth about Denver's to kind of start with. But the reality is that typically if a community is going to institute some additional requirement on development, what happens most often is developers that are looking at projects get their permit in right before, right? They're going to like bump it up and then permits will drop off after that, and then they rebound. So typically we see over the long term, it can have so all that to say, it can create some temporary fluctuations, but the academic research generally shows these types of policies do not have a long-term impact on development. So unless you design a completely unreasonable requirement, it's not going to chase development away forever. And then finally, and I'm sure Mollie will get into this a little bit in talking about how they have designed their inclusionary policy, but it's also important to think about specifically around inclusionary where those trade-offs are. So the devil is often in the details in these types of programs and these types of policies. So the couple things that we tend to look at kind of a broad level are how many units are being set aside in an inclusionary requirement, and then at what price points do those set aside units have to hit in order to be compliant. And so we call that breadth versus depth of affordability. You can either get a lot of units at just a slight market discount, or you can get really few units with a really deep market discount, right? Because those are going to impact the developer about the same way. And so this example is from a Denver feasibility analysis, which basically says that if you target the affordable units at 50% AMI, which is a pretty deep discount from market, then the market could bear about 5% of the development units being at that price. It would be about the same impact to the developer to do 12% of the total building if you let them raise the price up to 80. And so you're just playing with where that balance is. So it's just important to think about where are our community's needs if we want to think about this program, and how do we make sure those units are hitting that need, but also what's feasible for the market to manage. The other key trade-off is, do we want this policy to produce fees that we can then as a city use to develop affordable housing? So we want this to be a revenue source, and absolutely you can use linkage fees and inclusionary as a revenue generator, because you can really structure an inclusionary program, even though the premise of inclusionary is to say you have to deliver units at X price point. The reality is there's always a fee option for developers. You can structure that so it's more favorable for the developer to pay the fee. And in that context, you're basically creating a revenue generation opportunity. If you design the policy so that it's more favorable for the developer to build the units, then you're more likely to get units. And so not only do you have to kind of think about what policies do we want and what makes sense, but also really what are we trying to achieve with this policy? Are we using this as a revenue generation? Are we using this to create units? Do we want it to both? How does that play out? And so those are really key structural differences as you start getting down kind of the policy track. So I'm getting a little ahead of us just in terms of getting into that level of detail, but I think it's helpful to know up front kind of what pathways there are in terms of how these function. So with that, I'm going to kick over to Mollie O'Donnell from Longmont, who's going to talk a little bit about Longmont's inclusionary housing program, and then we'll come back. I'll talk a little bit more about some feasibility we did in Inglewood, as well as linkage fees. So Mollie, handing off to you, and I'm happy to click your slides through if you just tell me when to go forward.
Wonderful, will do. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. I really do feel very welcomed, and I'm happy to talk about Longmont's program. We've been doing a lot of work on it, and I think we've learned a lot of good information, and I'm happy to share. So, Mollie, I can't see the slides suddenly. Are they showing for you all? There we go. Okay, perfect. So I just wanted to show, we're not going to go into 90% of this, but I just wanted to kind of lay the land for Longmont. We have a long-standing affordable housing program, goes back to the 90s. And we have a lot of tools in our toolbox, one of which is our inclusionary housing ordinance. So I'm going to focus on that tonight, but just so you know, this is one of many tools that all piece together to get the affordable housing that we are so badly looking for. You click forward, Mollie. Okay, so our inclusionary housing program, going back a little bit in history, we had an inclusionary housing program. It was called our inclusionary zoning ordinance that goes back to the 90s. And that was dismantled by council in 2011 after the market crash. And then starting in 2016 or so, council requested, the new council at the time requested that staff work to bring back a new program. So it took a good 18 plus months of stakeholder outreach and work and research to come up with our program, but it went into effect in 2018. Our requirement, our base requirement is that 12% of all newly constructed residential be affordable, whether that is for sale homes at or below 80% of the AMI, or for rent homes, which are at or below 50% AMI, both of which have come with permanent deed restrictions, but the rental homes can be bought out after 30 years. That was really what is unique about that 80% for sale is in line with general HUD limits. But for rent homes at 50%, that was really based on Longmont's unique need and gap in affordability at the time, which still stands today. The basics are that, oh, I'm going back. Yeah, I'm going to stick there for a sec. Thanks, Mollie. So a key for council at the time was balancing the need for affordable housing unit generation with attracting market rate developers to Longmont, because obviously we need the market rate developers to get the affordable as well if we're doing it in this fashion. So what you'll see is we have a lot of options for compliance. I would say that we did so much work with developers putting together all of the options, all of which were really requested by those developers to be able to maximize their flexibility in getting the units built. But in the end, that turns out to be a pretty complicated program to administer. You certainly need in-house staff capacity to manage it that way. And now here we are, 5 going on 6 years in, and the developers that were so happy with the suite of options are now having to select from them, and they think that it's pretty complicated and can get confused sometimes. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. You end up with a good suite of options, but also that means you have to administer those. So that's just something that we like to say out in front, that when you're considering creating a new inclusionary housing program, to weigh how much work you want to do with that in the day-to-day management going forward. I will say we do have a unique aspect as well, because we were also trying to incentivize for sale middle income housing, because that is in short supply here. And so we do have an incentive where you can reduce your requirement to provide affordable in exchange for providing those middle income homes, deed restricted. Okay, go ahead and move. All right, so here's a suite of our options for compliance. Obviously, building on site is a straightforward option, but also developers could choose to build off-site as long as it's outside of areas of LMI concentration. So that's congruent with HUD qualified census tracts. You could purchase existing market rate homes and convert them to affordable. You could partner with a nonprofit to build homes on site or off site. Of course, same caveat about LMI concentrations. And this could also help lower your percentage requirement. You could donate land to the city or a nonprofit if you get council approval. Make a fee in lieu payment, which we're going to dive into a moment. And then we call it Let's Make a Deal. There's an opportunity for innovative solutions. You can come and propose to council a way that you think meets the intent of the inclusionary housing program, but maybe something that we haven't anticipated. And then finally, you're able to sell credits if you build more than the 12% required. So for either some master development areas or just developers that are able to partner with each other, they can go ahead and fill that requirement on one site instead of the other and transfer the credits. So when you're getting into deep in the weeds on the academic side of inclusionary housing, and this is where other Mollie will be able to really expand on this more, but Longmont leaned toward the affordability gap method rather than a development cost method. And that's really because we are comfortable with fee in lieu. In some communities, that development cost method, meaning that is incentivizing more of the on-site unit generation. And we are a fee in lieu friendly community, however, as long as we can balance it with unit generation on site. It's really about trying to find that balance. But Longmont has a locally funded affordable housing fund. It's $1 million a year transferred into from the general fund into a dedicated source, added with marijuana tax revenues and fee in lieu revenue. So between those three sources, we have a pretty healthy fund dedicated for affordable housing. And so that's why going with that affordability cost method really says that we are good with fee in lieu because we can leverage funding with our other locally funded sources and really help ramp up affordable development through more of a leveraging philosophy. So that kind of goes, we're going to dive into fee in lieu next, but I wanted to kind of go over Longmont's philosophy and why we have multiple options and how we're really trying to find a balance between some of those. All right, moving to fee in lieu, Mollie. All right, so our fee in lieu, we've got some of the basics on here in terms of when it's due to be paid. One of our new flexibilities is being able to pay it at building permit rather than at certificate of occupancy if you so choose. And that's really trying to play with our market conditions right now. Like when is the least risky time for a developer to make the payment? And that could change based on developer. But here's our fee in lieu amounts based on square foot for rental and for sale. These are new as of November. we just updated that amount. So our original ordinance from 2018 called for an update every 3 years. But then with the COVID pandemic and the housing market going haywire, we brought on Root Policy Research to help do our housing needs assessment in 2022. And we really wanted to utilize them as a resource to help us fine tune our inclusionary housing program before we made that fee in lieu update. So it just got updated here in the end of 2023. And these are the current amounts per square foot for rentals and for sale. So I would say that just to give a scope and scale of how the fee in lieu is valuable for us, we started ramping up. So the projects that were really subject to the inclusionary housing program and not grandfathered based on a cutoff point in time in the development review process when it first went into effect in 2018, we really started ramping up our revenues in 2022. And then in 2023, they really hit. And so here just a few weeks ago, we were able to put out $3 million in our competitive award process for affordable housing development partners in Longmont just in this year because of the boost that fee in lieu revenue gave. So that's just a way in that we just use it to try and maximize and leverage that funding. I would also say that increasing our fee in lieu was also an attempt to rebalance because as of 2023, 70% of our developers chose fee in lieu. That really is in this current market that is increased from the year prior, but before in 2022 it was about 56%. That is really telling us about the construction pricing and interest market and how it is less risky to pay fee in lieu than attempt to build the units on site, which up here, we're using a ballpark range of about $400,000 per unit to build. And of course, the if it's for sale or even rental, it's, the returns on that are not 400,000. So this was an attempt to rebalance and get some developers to choose some other options. We haven't yet seen true results in that yet. It's too soon. But we do know that we did get one land donation that was a developer that planned to do fee in lieu before the end of the year. And then we do have some developers seriously considering other options and certainly more on-site units being considered at this time. So that was, I think we're seeing signs that that was effective, but time will tell towards the end of the year. All right, you can move on, Molly. So this is that, the total flex option. A developer really can propose anything they would like to that they think meets the intent of the program, and that's subject to council approval. It really would need to, council makes the final determination if that is meeting the intent of the program and providing an equal to or greater benefit to the city. A couple of examples we did do in the earlier years of the inclusionary housing program. We did have one market rate developer partner with the Veterans Community Project to build 26 tiny homes of transitional housing for homeless veterans and add in some habitat homes for sale. And then covered fee in lieu for the remainder of their requirement. And so we have a primarily suburban single family development integrated with tiny homes of transitional housing for veterans and habitat homes. So I would say that would really was a great partnership. It was challenging. It was certainly challenging, confusing. It took a lot of work with the developer and the partners to make sure everybody understood what was going on, understanding that our inclusionary housing program was just a couple years old at that point. And then we had another deal that we've got a land donation to Habitat is a common proposal at this point. And then we have a couple of other ones in the works that are not through Habitat, but just other land donations that they're proposing and that council has supported. You want to move on to the next one? This is more of the sausage making side of it, but when you're talking about staff capacity to implement your inclusionary housing program, this is some of the documentation and ongoing follow-up that we have to make sure that we plan for and do on an ongoing basis. So I'll just let you digest that. We don't have to go through each of them, but you can always ask questions. And then if you want to move on, that was it from me. I don't know if you want to do questions now or at the end. I'll leave that up to the meeting managers.
Okay, meeting managers say keep going and wait for questions at the end. So stay tuned and formulate your questions for Mollie for sure. So as we move on, I'm going to do a real kind of cursory overview of this feasibility analysis. The full analysis was included in your packet. It was part of the work that we did for the city around their housing needs assessment back in 2023. It basically looks at what are some options for an incentive program and an inclusionary program. It evaluates the impact of those options on the market and takes a look at, well, could these even work in Inglewood as kind of a broad brush look at those potential options. So at the time, we were focusing on some of the incentives that were under consideration as part of the zoning code. And so these are essentially kind of the programs and incentives that we looked at. So on kind of a more single family side, we looked at single family detached and row homes with those AMIs and set asides there, along with paired with incentives. And so our goal was to say, do these incentives work? Would they be attractive? If they're not super attractive, would they also work in an inclusionary type structure? On the multifamily side, we looked at additional density as well as parking reductions as part of that bonus. The kind of bottom line of that analysis, and there's obviously a lot of depth to that, basically shows, yes, that incentive package does create benefit to developers under typical development incentives. However, we also know that some of those developers are getting parking reductions and other things in specific areas of the city. And so in those areas, it's less likely that developers would opt in because they may already be getting some type of incentive or benefit. On the inclusionary side, it was apparent based on kind of the bottom line or return impact that we modeled that a mandatory inclusionary program that would be similar to those incentives that we looked at would be feasible. And so it would, obviously under an inclusionary, you're more likely to get the units because developers have to comply. But as we looked at that, there was material benefit in those. And so developer returns should actually increase with that structure, even when it's required. That doesn't mean every single developer will benefit, but when we look at the typical development, that inclusionary program with those incentives actually is a benefit to the developer from a return standpoint. So our bottom line recommendation at the time was, yes, go ahead and put incentives in the code because that was part of what the code rewrite was doing. But as a longer term step, continue discussions of mandatory inclusionary, which is what we are doing here. We are continuing that discussion. So I'm happy to answer questions about that feasibility analysis, but I didn't want to spend too much time on it because I felt like kind of a more conceptual conversation about whether or not this makes sense, what was probably where we are in this phase at this point. But it's helpful reference. And for those that are really interested in kind of the development economics and how these programs fit in, doing a deep dive in that feasibility analysis would be fun for you, I'm sure, right? Everybody? Great. So pivoting briefly now to linkage fees. So at the beginning, we talked about these kind of market-based policy tools that include incentives, inclusionary, and linkage fees. Linkage fees are the ones that are fee-based. They can apply to all development. And I'm just going to give you kind of a little bit more of an in-depth, but not too in-depth kind of overview of that. So again, linkage fee programs mandate an impact fee on new development, and it can apply to residential, commercial, or both of those. And that fee is designed to be in proportion to that development's impact on affordable housing needs. So that proportional impact is really important. That is part of what makes these legal. So you have to pay close attention to that. That impact is determined by a quantitative analysis that's called a nexus study. And so there is kind of a rubric by which you have to follow to implement these fees or to calculate what you could possibly charge. Typically what we see is communities will do a nexus study or contract out a nexus study, establish what would be a legal fee to charge, and then they charge something below that. So you're not in any way obligated to assess the full fee. You can say, look, we'd really like to offset 50% of the impact that this new development has with a fee, or 25%, or 75%. So you have a lot of flexibility once you conduct a nexus study to really determine where under that ceiling you want to assess that fee and how you want to assess it. You do, your legal counsel will give you lots of rules around these, and I'm not going to try to give you legal counsel, but that's kind of the broad brush of like, you calculate what the impact is by development type. So typically a commercial fee might be different than a residential. Typically, even within commercial, a lot of times you'll see categories of this is our fee for retail, this is our fee for office, this is our fee for industrial, and this is our fee for residential. The reason you see a lot of linkage fees and impact fees in general in Colorado is because they're a fee, they can be legislatively approved, but do not require a voter approval because it's not a tax, and because it is specifically tied to the impact that that development is creating. Broadly speaking, people and communities like impact fees because they feel inherently fair, because they are applied to all development types, whereas inclusionary just is applied to residential, and because they are linked to these very concrete, quantifiable impacts. So that's one of the benefits, is that it's a fairly like objective way to think about and assess these types of structures. They're most common in communities that already have some type of impact fee system. So, for example, there's Lafayette is probably one example, or actually Loveland is one of the first communities in Colorado that even had impact fee systems. They have impact fees for everything, right? And so, so you'll often see these types of fees in communities that already have some type of impact fee structure. The other benefit, of course, is that they generate revenue for affordable development. That's the key objective of these fee systems. Challenges are that it does require this nexus study, so that is typically something that communities have to contract out, and so there is an upfront cost to that. The other challenge is that because you're not asking developers to build the units for you, the city has to do that. And so the city's collecting fees, the city has to wait until you have enough fees to actually inject that into an affordable housing project. And so there can be a little bit of a lag between kind of when the new development comes online and when you can actually start seeing the benefits of that. So there's a little bit of a delay, and it puts kind of the onus on a city to push those dollars out the door. Incentives and options, we talked about how inclusionary is typically paired with some kind of incentive. Linkage fees typically are not paired with any kind of incentive. Although you will sometimes see a linkage fee program that says, oh, if you don't want to pay the linkage fee, you can build the units. So it's kind of the exact opposite of an inclusionary program, which is really build first, pay a fee if you don't want to build. We have seen linkage fee systems where it's a fee system, but if you'd rather build the units for us, you can do that. The legal context is just like any other linkage fee or any other impact fee. So nexus study, maximum legally defensible amounts, and then it is critical that the city spends the revenue on that to defer the impact of those developments. So your hands are a little bit tied. It's not just like a free pound of money you can do whatever you want with. It does have to be spent in relation to that proportional impact. So to summarize, that was my deep dive on impact fees, so maybe that wasn't super deep, but I think you guys get the picture. To kind of wrap up, I am not intending to read this. I put this in the deck so you would have it as reference. It's also in the report, but it just kind of covers the three market-based tools and kind of what the basics, incentive opportunities, benefits, challenges, and then the legal requirements. So that's just there for your reference. It's not any content that we haven't covered. And then just as like a quick review, there's a number of programs that have inclusionary, or a number of cities that have inclusionary in Colorado. There's a bunch in mountain communities. Almost all the ski resorts have at least some type of inclusionary program. Along the Front Range, the folks that have one are Longmont, Boulder, Superior, Denver, Broomfield, and Littleton. There are a handful of other communities that are thinking about it, that are pursuing it, but haven't done that yet. And that's for mandatory inclusionary. Most communities have at least some type of incentive program. So that's super common. I didn't put that on the slide. And then for linkage fee programs, this may not be a perfectly up-to-date comprehensive list, but it's a pretty substantial list. So Denver has inclusionary for residential, but applies a linkage fee on commercial development. And that's how they kind of make sure they're capitalizing affordable housing needs on both types of development. Boulder does the exact same thing. Lafayette has a linkage fee system that applies to all development. Basalt has a commercial. Breckenridge has commercial as well as a linkage fee on short-term rentals. Estes Park also has a short-term rental linkage fee. San Miguel County, Gunnison, and Summit County all have linkage fee programs as well. So there's definitely precedent. It is not every community, but that gives you kind of a sense of where those are most common. And then as kind of a summary slide on how you're thinking about these policies. I mean, when we talk with communities about whether or not this makes sense, kind of the first question is, do we even want or need a market-based tool? Do we want that to be part of our policy approach? So how do these market-based policy options fit in with the city's overall housing strategy? What other tools are in the toolkit? As Mollie mentioned, inclusionary is not the silver bullet. It's not the only thing that Longmont is using to address this need, but it is a key tool. And so you want to think about, how does this fit in with other things that we're doing? Does it fill a gap? Does it help us bridge a gap? And then how do those policy options, within the market-based structure, kind of how do those complement other programs or opportunities? Are we able to get land donations that help Habitat, or how are we kind of using this? Are we supporting our housing authority in a way that's going to help maximize kind of these efforts collectively? So that's kind of the first, do we want this tool? Does it make sense to be part of our housing strategy? If the answer is yes, then there's a handful of those other nuances around the policies that help guide you toward, should we do linkage? Should we do inclusionary? Should we do a combination of both? Should we just have voluntary incentives? What is that? And these are some of the questions that we typically advise communities to think about. Like, do we want this to be mandatory or voluntary? Do we want to generate fees? Do we want to produce housing units? Do we want to do both? Do we want to offer incentives? Do we not? What income targets do we need and set asides? And so obviously there's lots of nuance once you start getting into it. And I'm not going to go through this next slide, but this is kind of a flow chart that kind of just outlines those questions, and how you answer those questions kind of leads you to some of these different policy options. So those slides are in there mostly as reference for you all as you continue to discuss and continue to think about this. And with that, I will stop talking and we can jump into questions, I think. And we can pull Mollie back.
So the fee in lieu, you're showing the difference between rental properties versus projects for sale. The fee in lieu was more than double for projects for sale versus rentals. Why is that? What's the thought process?
Sure, I'll give a conceptual answer, and then Mollie can jump in on their experience with Longmont as well. The conceptual answer is that the way fees in lieu are typically determined is the most common method is what's called the affordability gap. And what you do is you take a look at what is the market rate for either the rental unit or the for sale unit. What can the developer get for that? And then how different is that from the affordable requirement? So on the rental side, if market rate rents are $2,000 and we're saying we need you to deliver 10% of your units, or 12% in Longmont's case, at $1,000, the affordability gap is $1,000. It's the margin between the affordable rent and the market rate rent. Same calculation on the for sale side, but there is a bigger difference right now in the for sale market based on where market rate products are coming out for new construction and where the affordable need is based on that AMI. So it's driven by the differences in market versus affordable, because that reflects the cost to developer of selling that at a discounted price. So it's connected to, we're saying, hey, developer, we'd like you to build 5% of these units at this price. And that's different than what they could get. So we're just quantifying that difference in a fee. And so it's a way to make those as close to equivalent as possible in terms of measuring the margin. Now, again, that's not on every unit. That's per affordable unit required. So in a system like Longmont's, where 12% of their units need to be affordable, then they're paying. Actually, I shouldn't say that, because Longmont does that differently, because they then factor in that 12%. But you're not paying that on every single unit, right? You're paying that difference just on the affordably required units. Does that make sense conceptually? And Mollie, jump in, because I know you guys actually then, so Longmont, you can do that as a per unit fee. Longmont then calculates that as a square foot fee and then distributes it across the whole development instead of saying for each affordable unit.
I think what Mollie said is spot on. We really do look at market price data for the prior 18 months when we set the amount. And it really just is that it takes into account multiple factors, but really looking at those market prices and what that developer return could be for both situations kind of comes into play.
And to follow on that, as I said, like, that's the most common methodology to determine a fee. But the city has the authority to set those fees below that or at a different spot. And so, for example, if you want to use this to collect revenue, you may say, oh, we just want to start with like a small fee and just collect some revenue, and you can set it low. So you have an ability to set the fee based on what you think is appropriate. There are some communities that have set the fee really high. So for example, City of Atlanta had one, and they set the fee at the full development cost. So they said, look, it's going to cost us $400,000 to build this rental unit because you're not going to build it. You got to pay us that full $400,000. So not just the gap between price point to affordable price point, but the whole amount. And not surprisingly, every developer said, we're just going to build the units. Thank you. So that's where that policy design starts to play in, where you set those fees incentivizes developers to do different things.
I'm curious to know the reason for the buyout mechanism in Longmont's policy for rentals after 30 years.
I'll let you take that, Molly. Why does your rental expire or have a buyout option? I shouldn't say expire.
So I think part of this is driven by one of the reasons why the old inclusionary housing program was dismantled after the market crash is that on the for sale side, we were having a problem with deed restricted homeowners going into foreclosure. So that was on one side. So we did update our deed restriction for both to make sure that we're planning for that. On that rental side, so very often the rental market, the owners of the buildings, either they sell to new investors and they can turn that over. And then additionally, there's a chance for a condominium conversion as well after a certain amount of time. And now that doesn't match up with the 30 years exactly, but there was some flexibility needed in there to be able to convert the use if needed. There's a lot more history behind that one. I'm trying to keep it very brief, which is a challenge, but there's a lot of background.
Molly mentioned that the Longmont program was kind of difficult to administrate with all of the options. I was wondering if they needed to hire staff full-time to assist with that, or how they cope with that.
We do have one full-time staff member administering the inclusionary housing program. And then as the portfolio grows of IH deed restricted units, we're about to bring on hopefully a part-time compliance person to do some of that long-term monitoring and follow-up.
Please.
Molly, I have a quick question for you. With the linkage fees and the sort of legal requirements around linkage fees, do the funds have to be spent on development only, or can they be used for preservation?
That's a question I typically defer to a city attorney because I don't want to get in trouble. I typically think that you can define that broadly enough to include preservation, because the intent of the policy is to create the affordability within the units. And so whether you do that through a subsidy that then brings the price down, or if you do that through new creation, in my opinion, those would both comply. I've seen different city attorneys be more and less strict, just depending on their comfort level with that.
Please, Jesse.
I have a question about Longmont's ordinance on inclusionary zoning. One of the benefits that Longmont has that Inglewood doesn't is that you have land and space to grow. Inglewood is fully built out, so most of the conversations we have are about redevelopment. And I'm curious on an inclusionary ordinance how having land has been part of the calculation for developers in your community versus the challenges that we would face. And then I'm also wondering, what feedback have you gotten since 2018 when you implemented the new ordinance from your development community? Are there people who have passed from building in Longmont due to some of these ordinances that you've passed? Or, I mean, every home builder will say, you absolutely cannot do this, it'll be way too expensive, we cannot build here. Have people actually done that, or what's the reception been with your market rate partners?
So the first question, so we are approaching that point where there's no more greenfield development. We're close. And so we're turning to infill. slowly but surely. I mean, infill's been happening for a long time, but the rate of it will be increasing. We expect our fee in lieu revenues to, right now, they've been in the ramp up phase, and we expect them to plateau and then maybe just hold steady. That's what we anticipate as we move to infill development, where sites are lower and we still don't have a market that really supports building past 4 stories. And so as that gradually changes and height of buildings is more palatable and the market can support it, maybe that plateau will stay as is, maybe it'll ramp up again, but we really do see those fee and lieu as moving as we grow as a community and how things transition. In terms of the question from developers, you know, we had a fair number of developers come out in November when we were updating our fee and lieu saying, you know, you would kill our project. None of them have been killed. What has killed projects is construction costs and interest rates more than the fee and lieu or rate or inclusionary housing requirements, really. So we have not seen any direct link to a project or a developer declining to build here, especially as they get more familiar with inclusionary housing programs across the Front Range. It's just kind of becoming more expected.
Other questions?
You know, all of these tools are to spur market rate developers to provide affordable housing. Are there common unintended consequences for nonprofit or for-profit LIHTC developers?
Not typically. So typically, these types of programs run kind of on a separate track. So, I mean, in a typical inclusionary or incentive program, you're asking a developer to contribute somewhere between 5% and 20% of those units to be affordable in exchange for, you know, incentives as we talked about. A typical LIHTC is 99% affordable. Typical nonprofit development, 99% affordable. Same kind of across the board. So the nonprofit realm is really unique in that they're kind of operating on a whole different level of development. And so we don't see these developments pulling away or taking, you know, property from a nonprofit and that sort of thing. In the case of Longmont, where they've created a program that also does allow a transfer basically to those nonprofits. It actually boosts specifically habitat on the home ownership side for Longmont. So you more often will see a land donation in a single family development where they say, I'm not building affordable single family, that seems hard. Let me just give a bunch of land to Habitat or have Habitat do it for us. And so it can actually be a catalyst for nonprofits depending on how you structure it. So we do, I mean, I should also say that typically on incentive programs, even if you have an inclusionary with an incentive, we often see kind of a different set of incentives that cities will then offer to nonprofits. So they may be deeper incentives, they may be different incentives. Littleton, when they put their inclusionary in, they did 2 tiers. They said, look, if you're willing to, if you're kind of a typical developer, we're just trying to get you to do some market rate or some affordable, you get these incentives. If you're building more than 50% affordable, we know you're a nonprofit or a LIHTC and we're giving you these incentives. And so there's ways to kind of make sure that you're taking care of both parties. They typically need different things.
Other questions? Thank you.
If a jurisdiction does some of the ones that need to be administered, where does that money typically come from? Does it come from the linkage fee? Does it come from general fund?
Yep, most often the administrative costs are covered by either the fee in lieu, so the folks that decide to pay the fee in lieu, or the linkage fee revenue. I mean, certainly there can be a lag there because you need somebody on board to manage beforehand. And so typically there's a little bit of a general fund that needs to support that. But most of the time those programs can be self-sustaining on that front. There are also occasions where communities put these into place. They don't have staff to enforce it. They're like, we don't have the expertise. And so a lot of times you'll see them contracting that out to the housing authority and writing a memorandum of understanding and say, look, we're going to pay you X dollars per unit, or we're going to pay you an annual stipend to manage the income qualification on these units that get built, to do the enforcement, because the housing authority is probably already doing that on a handful. Or occasionally you'll have like a LIHTC developer that covers that as well. So there's ways to outsource that, particularly if you expect a relatively low volume of units.
Any other questions?
Do you see, you've been doing this a while, so as the cities across Colorado have done it, or towns, have you seen a trend in kind of urban settings such as Inglewood versus maybe something like Longmont or up in the mountains?
Great question. I don't know that I've seen a super clear trend. I mean, absolutely, the mountain communities are always kind of the front runners on what can we possibly do to create housing. And so they've had them in place much longer than most other communities. Denver had one years ago before their kind of most recent one. They had one a long time ago. So I would say nationwide, it used to be primarily common in the more urban context to capitalize on that multifamily development. More and more, even nationwide, we're seeing this as metro areas are starting to adopt them kind of all over. And that's starting to be what we see here in Colorado. Boulder's had one in a long time. So Boulder, Denver kind of were the two anchors. Now we're really seeing a little bit more of a suburban look at that. The same happened in Minneapolis. So suburbs in Minneapolis have also had one in place for a while. So we're seeing it just be a more common tool. California, you have to have inclusionary. They're a whole different, as we know, bureaucratic beast of a state. Every community in California is required to have an inclusionary housing ordinance. So that's kind of a separate one. You see a lot of them on the East Coast as well. We're seeing more and more kind of in mountain reaches in the Midwest.
Any other questions? All right. Can we thank our two presenters, the Mollie Irish
The
twins?
Irish
Yay.
Thank you, Mollie O'Donnell.
Thank you for having me.
Do you have, oh, you have the clicker. That's okay, no worries. No worries. All right, so now we're going to try to do some sense making or reflection on that. And we're going to, as I said, we're going to try something new. So the question broadly is given the information that you just received, what might you all consider moving forward in terms of inclusionary zoning and linkage fees? The way we're going to do this, I'm going to give you first an opportunity to reflect on your own ideas. And then what we're going to do is you're going to pair up with someone. So you're going to pair up for someone. So you're going to reflect on your own first for a minute. Then you'll pair up with someone, and you all will have a conversation. And you really want to build upon each other's ideas. So you want to share your idea from your solo reflection. Then you're going to actually build on each other's ideas. Then your pairs are going to form a foursome. So, and I'll give you time. I'll call time on this so you'll know. Then from the foursome, first of all, let's see how many people we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, one foursome will be a fivesome. Fivesome, is that a word? So you'll have 4 minutes in your foursome. Again, you're just building on each other's ideas. And from there, you're actually going to share out to a large group. We're going to see where we get. We actually have time to probably cycle through this a couple of times, but we're going to see where we get on them, and I'll be time checking. So what you're going to hear is I'm actually going to be kind of very strict on the time. The idea here is not to get a sort of perfect idea, but it's just to, again, to think and to think together on how it is that you all might consider leveraging these kinds of policies moving forward. Any questions about, and I'll give you directions as we go, about what we're doing? Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute to reflect on your own, jot down your ideas. You'll then go into pair up, and but first I'll give you that minute beginning now. In a large group. So you use it. Perfect. And you can bring that in. Okay, that's a minute. So you want to find your pair. It's probably easy. Just turn to the person next to you. But when we get to the foursome, you're going to have to move around a little bit. And what you're doing is you're just having a conversation, sharing back and forth about what your solar reflection was, and you want to build on each other's ideas so that when you go into the foursome, you've kind of coalesced around a common idea, right? Does that make sense? Okay, great. You got 2 minutes. Okay, Sean. All right, you have about 30 more seconds. I hate more than anything talking about myself, so I always say, oh. All right. Now, let's just do this because actually I'm remembering that staff is not participating. So if we could have you 5 join up, and if we could have you 4 join up. So again, you're building on each other's ideas, and you're looking for, if I could just have your attention, you're looking for commonality that you can actually report out to the large group. So you have something a little, cohesive to actually report out. We are going to go through this cycle one more time. So you've got a longer time now. You have about 4 or 5 minutes for this. All right, I'll give you just a couple more minutes. Actually, all right, you want to begin to wrap it up, please? Thank you. Okay. Which group and which person inside of that group would like to share the ideas that you all have been percolating on? Oh. Yeah, well, definitely. I just happen to be looking at this group, so we'll go with this group. Who's sharing?
It's not even coming up.
Well, I mean, Samantha and I had talked early on just about sort of identifying with the logic of a linkage fee, that, you know, as the city develops and grows, just like, you know, there's linkage fees for parks and police and fire in some communities, you know, as the community grows, you need to have more amenities to keep up with the same quality of life, the same character of the neighborhood, the same accessibility. And so, at least to me and what we had talked about, was that just kind of seemed very logical that you draw a straight line between as things grow and as developers, especially market rate developers, are making money off of the city, you know, they should help pay for some of those more amenities to just keep the city at the same, you know, level of amenity. So, I don't know. Anybody else want to chime in?
Thank you, Aaron.
I think you did a good job, but
Well, and also to say, I mean, we talked about that, but not to say that that was like our choice over inclusionary housing, whether voluntary or involuntary, but just, like I said, that's what I kind of identified.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then also, now that I think for the first time, finally, I'm really starting to grasp those three big options. And now, like Corey said, now I feel like I need to go back and look at the housing needs assessment for Inglewood and say, how do we apply this specifically to Inglewood? And haven't felt like I'd done that quite yet, and that's the next step.
Gotcha. So cross-reference that. Anyone else from this group? Thank you. Give them a, do y'all do that? Do you do that? Do you, yeah, maybe, clap. Group number 2, please. Thank you, Harry.
So we kind of came to the conclusion that we think involuntary inclusionary zoning makes more sense because there's not a lot of opportunities to redevelop in Inglewood. And a linkage fee isn't going to provide much assistance in attaining affordable housing quantity. It's going to provide a fund that if we don't have the land to build on, then what good does it do us? And we'd also kind of came to the conclusion that we would love to know what the city is already doing. We know that there have been parking reductions, the ADU overlays, the cottage laws, but where does that fall in with what our needs are and where are we at, I guess. Yeah. And then I can't remember anything. Okay. I think that's
well done, Sherry. But similarly, you have a sort of a forming point of view or perspective on it, but you need more information. You need to actually be able to answer some of those questions. Is that, did I hear that correctly?
Yeah. So I think so.
Anyone else? Sagan.
Can other people pose questions?
Yes, please,
Since you all asked the question about, other things that the city is doing outside of Code Next, what specifically are you thinking that, basically, we're not doing anything? I mean, I think that we really rely on the housing authority.
I don't know that we've really talked about the full gamut of what Code Next is doing, just a few pieces of it.
So Brian covered pretty much everything in Code Next that was incentive-based. So you mentioned some of the different density requirements that are opportunities now in some zones, the parking reductions, height for multifamily as a bonus, those types of things. But frankly, we're waiting for a lot of your work to be concluded relative to the recommendations for things like inclusion, whatever they may be, to essentially go to the next phase and incorporate those recommendations as an actual housing policy and incorporate any requirements into that. So we did that first part in Code Next with, kind of what we can do it at the development level, but in terms of those housing policies and the fees, the taxes, the inclusionary, that's really the outcome of this work will be informing of the council members in the policies they determine to actually actualize some of this stuff going forward.
The other thing I would add is, when you saw that lovely quadrant illustration from Longmont, their toolbox, they've got revenue, a source of funding, they have mandates, they have a way to generate new units, all of these things, and then they have code in one quadrant. We have almost none of that. We only have code. So we need to build out the other 3 quadrants through this workflow. And so I think hearing from you all what you think should go there is really helpful, but maybe it's even helpful to think of it in those buckets of like what types of interventions can we have? Because as Molly said, there's no silver bullets, but I do think that there's some silver buckshots. And like there's a lot, if we do a lot of things, we can make that difference. So that's where we're at.
And I think that's kind of what we were talking about is revisiting that housing needs assessment to say, all right, what are the major priorities in terms of housing, especially affordable housing for the city of Inglewood, and then coming back to inclusionary zoning, linkage fees, what other, you've mentioned transfer fees or something like that. What are all the different tools that Inglewood could implement to address those needs?
I think that's helpful. I think we were just saying that a lot of the recommendations, we feel like some of those are already in place through Code Next. So we were with the parking reductions and with some of the things that they mentioned. And so we were like, aren't we already doing that? And so what is the need? And that makes sense. So.
Other responses to or questions for each group? Do you all have questions of this group? Okay.
Actually, Glenna, can I ask a question? I'm sorry if my time is past.
No, you just thought of
it. I did. Sorry. Would a like a menu of I'm trying to really make sure that we're providing you all with the information that you all need to formulate, policies, et cetera. Would that menu of options kind of all laid out together of everything in the toolbox that Chelsea mentioned, all of the toolboxes that we've seen used in other communities and laying those options out, which is what we've been going over in each session. We've been laying out another like tool that other cities have used, like the land trust, we had that. I mean, we've been trying to lay those out in each one of these sessions, but would something that's kind of comprehensive that is more of a menu of options be helpful? I'm just trying to respond to your need for information.
I think maybe once we get everything put together, that'd be really helpful once we start to form suggestions for city council to kind of have all of that laid out. That would be really helpful and to know what's already in place versus what some of the things we hear about are in place, the cottage laws. And so sometimes I think it was just confusing on where we're going or what's already happening, I guess.
And I would agree. I think it would be really helpful to know exactly what you're asking us to do. Because I finally feel like I'm starting to grasp some of these terms. I think I'm talking louder, huh? I feel like I'm finally understanding some of these terms. And so it's like, oh, I know we talked about it, but now in this context, I have questions. And so I do think some clarity from council or whomever for me as to what it is you specifically want us to address now.
So we will do both of those things because I was speaking with Chelsea, like understanding sort of what altitude that you want to form your recommendations will be important. If you think about your strategic vision, that's like at a 30,000 foot altitude, we're going to drop down. I just want to quickly remind everyone, so we have essentially 2 more learning opportunities where we'll have folks come in and speak about some of the tools in the toolbox. And then in September, and I think, Sean, this might be a really great time to help bring cohesion to everything that you've heard so far. We have to do some sense making. It's a lot of stuff. Aside from the presentations, the pre-work, all of it, that's a lot. And if you're not in this field and sort of living and breathing it every single day, I imagine that it could be overwhelming. So in September, that's exactly what we're going to do, and I think that's actually a really great idea. And to have it sort of laid out, kind of like Longmont did, so you have, hey, you know this is policy or code, and so does that make sense for folks? Yeah? So while I'm on it, just very quickly, in July, we will have a presentation on funding and public-private partnerships. In August, we'll talk about regionalization and cottages. And then, as I said, that will sort of be the end of the learning journey. From there, that's where the fun happens. And I'm trying to position it as fun, y'all. We're going to have so much fun together. We're going to pull those agreements out that you all, which actually I should also have it on chart paper all of the time. We're going to pull those agreements out, and we've got some nifty tools to help get you all to alignment, because ultimately you all have been doing such hard work, and you want to feel like, that your voice is heard in that. So any questions about the process from this point forward, or anything from this evening? All right. See, I feel like I have to speak really loud. I'm not used to the mic. Am I really loud? Okay, good. Thanks for validating me. All right, so we're drawing to the close. I can't even remember. I think it was an intern who actually reached out to my company and asked if we would be interested in submitting a proposal to facilitate this work. And when I looked at it, it was like, yes, and I can't do that on my own. And I had this opportunity to work with Tasha at Jeffco Public Schools. And the first time that I had a chance to work, I'm like, oh, you're coming with me to Inglewood for sure. And we've had an opportunity to partner on a couple of different things. And I just have enormous respect for her work. And I want to give her an opportunity. We thought carefully about how to lay this out, and it may feel kind of abrupt. And thank you, Sean. I was sharing with Tasha, I hate talking about myself, so I tend to just kind of try to get it over with in my introductions. So Sean, thank you for reminding me that I actually have been on all of the calls and been on this journey behind the scenes with you. So it's not like this cold handoff. We've been working in partnership together, and we thought really carefully about the best way to lay this out. And it seemed like the best way to lay it out was to do a lot of learning, and then to switch in the middle of that, the facilitation, and that's sort of what I focus on. She has more content knowledge in this subject, a lot more content knowledge than I do. My love, and I think specialty, is again trying to get groups to consensus. We'll see how I do in September, October, November, December. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my partner.
I cannot express how excited I am for you that you get to work with Glenna. She is like dynamic, phenomenal in this next phase of the work. So all the questions that you asked today, I'm just thrilled for you and that you're going to get to embark on the fun, as she describes it. And so just to reflect, I want to thank you all just for how you've been so invested in working through like all of the complexities of this topic. And it's really been a collective effort as you've worked really hard to deepen your understanding. And to Sean's point, we worked really hard, Glenna and Lindsay and the staff worked really hard to be thoughtful about what those themes can be to help enrich that learning, to help you make a very informed decision for your suggestion list. And so just the dialogues you've had, the exploration that you've done around key themes, around impact fees, around linkage fees, incentives, and really their impact on development. I just appreciate you for the way that you've been trying to get in the trenches and try to think of innovative solutions, even when you don't know what you don't know yet. You've just been you've been so committed, and it's admirable to watch. And so as you've grappled with the nuances of zoning, Jake, as you've been trying to explore funding resources, I think you wrote money 1,000,000 times in the breakouts, Corey. Just the dollar signs, pretty much that's what we need, right? And just the valuable insights that you've gained and that you've shared together, because there's been a nice like breadth of expertise, of lived experience, work experience, and passion. We've had some meaningful discussions. And so there have been moments of clarity, moments of disagreement, and I think that's okay because you guys have this shared commitment in finding a solution for the city of Inglewood. And so as you continue to delve into the intricacies of affordability, accessibility, and creating a thriving housing economy, I want to thank you for the I like, I wish, I wonder reflections, because they're so helpful hopefully they were helpful for you when you reflected back on what you shared, but they've helped highlight areas of progress in the learning. But, you know, to Sherry's point, they also help highlight, wait, we still need this. We still don't know X. And so Sean, thank you for setting the stage to be able to think about what more is needed to help position this group for success. So as we look ahead, you get to work with this amazing human in this prioritization and recommendation process. And I look forward to coming back and hearing and seeing what you've created. And so at this stage, I hope that you will be energized by the momentum that you've created thus far. I really hope you will. And that you'll continue to leverage your collective expertise. I want to know each and every one of you, and don't freak out when I start inviting you to connect on LinkedIn. I'm in awe of your commitment to this city. And so continue to embrace the diverse perspectives that you bring and lean in on this collaborative effort. You all bring brilliant, brilliant ideas. And I celebrate your commitment and in this process. And thanks for all you do. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
I feel a little bit like Britney Spears, if I'm telling the truth. Like, swear I got a microphone. Y'all have no idea. All right, so I wish, I wonder. These really are very, very helpful for us. And as you know, we include those in the synopsis of each of the meetings, so I invite you to look at that. If there's not been something, particularly in the I wonder category, that hasn't been addressed thus far, we're going to take a look at it also, but I would invite you to please flag that for us. So, all right, with that, if that's your exit ticket, thank you for being here. I look forward to, how many people are on vacation in July? I know it's summer. Does anyone know that they're going to be on vacation? 11. I'm not publicly calling you out. I'm just trying to, it sounds like most of you will be able to be here, which is fabulous. So we'll look forward to seeing you in July, and thank you again.